Do you know what I might do? Hang on.
Hi, Debbie. Thanks for meeting with me this morning.
Good morning, Mel. Hello.
For anyone who might be watching, I met Debbie on our block course for the specialist teaching program at Massey University. Debbie's a resource teacher of the deaf and I'm resource teacher of vision. So we decided we'd partner up to explore each other's roles, and here we go. But given that we have a limited time on Zoom, we're not going to do too much chit chat. We'll get quite straight into the questions.
Straight into it. Okay, off you go.
Awesome. So Debbie, where are you based and what's your title?
So I'm a resource teacher of the deaf. I am based up in the far north in the Ko Taku region. So the majority of my mainstream schools are in the Ko Taku district, but my patch, if you like, is from north of Kaior right up to the top to Cape Reinga.
Oh, cool. Lovely place in the world. And how long have you been in RTD and what did you do before that?
Look, I think we actually started our roles at the same time, July last year. So this is my 5th term actually as an RTD. So I'm really a rookie still, really. Before that, I was a classroom teacher. And I had roles in primary, intermediate and area school situations. Yeah.
Very similar. Okay. Can I ask before, so I get this question and before we cut off, why is it called a resource teacher of the deaf rather than a resource teacher of hearing impaired?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. Our students are referred to as deaf and hard of hearing, but in general, deaf refers to the lack of or the impairment of hearing. So the term deaf really is an umbrella across the spectrum of hearing loss. It's a generalization. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just wondering because we are resource teachers of vision, not resource teachers of blind. Thank you. That clears that up.
Yeah.
On that note, is deaf a current and acceptable term? Is deaf what a deaf person would want to be called? Is that PC?
Look, it really does depend on the person. So somebody who uses sign language as their first language, they would call themselves, they would be proudly deaf, and their deafness would be a capital D. And so deafness would be their culture, their identity, their social circle, their life, and they wouldn't choose any other way. And so their term deaf would be welcomed. On the other end of the spectrum, other people might treat their hearing impairment as a medical condition. And so they would sort of follow the medical model of deafness. So their deafness can be helped and overcome by surgery, technology that can help them hear. And so they might not be welcome to be called deaf. So they might have a cochlear implant, they might use hearing aids, they'll use oral language, and they probably wouldn't appreciate the term deaf as much as a culturally deaf person would.
So it's an identity thing, really. It's whether you
identify.
Definitely. Okay.
Definitely, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Can you tell me a little bit about Ko Taku Reo as an organisation, its history? Is it a school? Blends as a school? Is Ko Taku Reo a school?
Yes, it is. It's New Zealand's national deaf school. There is one national deaf school in the whole country. Before it was split up into a school in Christchurch called Van Ash and Kelston Deaf Education Centre in Auckland. So the deaf schools, there's a long history of deaf schools in New Zealand right back to 1880. But at that point, there was no sign language allowed in schools. It was all oral language because of a convention in 1880 where the powers that be said that sign language is not good, and deaf children will only benefit from in society with oral language. So actually sign language was banned in all of the deaf schools right up to, I think it was 1993 when Kelston Deaf Education Centre had its first bilingual sign language and English lesson. Crazy, isn't it?
I had no idea.
Crazy.
Did you say 1993?
1993 was the first time Kelston used sign language at school. Yeah, crazy. So So the two schools, one in Christchurch, one in Auckland. Christchurch was first. Auckland came sort of in the late 50s. But in 2020, they amalgamated into Ko Taku Reo. So now we are one school and we cover the whole of New Zealand. Yeah. Yeah, amazing
Awesome.
history.
Yeah, so there's lots of parallels there with blind education history in New Zealand, but we'll get into that in our next interview, shall we? So how many Ko Taku Reo centres are there in New Zealand?
So although it's one school, they've still maintained the identity of, there is a campus in Christchurch, which was the old Van Ash, and there is a campus in Auckland, the old Kelston. So they are enrolled schools. So deaf children come to the school. It's tuition in sign language. They come as a day student, they go home, or they can board it. They are both boarding schools. So they are the two main centres. In Auckland, Christchurch and Wellington, we have provision centres, and they might be classrooms attached to a mainstream school. Where deaf children in that area might go for the day to their local mainstream school where there's availability. But apart from that, the rest of the country from Bluff to Cape Reinga have resource outreach. It's called the outreach school. Yeah. So so that's resource teachers like me who travel from school to school, mainstream schools, teaching children in their own school.
So the outreach have itinerant teachers, and then there's those base centres that they can choose to, if they're in those areas, they could go to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
are they? What did you say they're called? Outreach? Because
they're called. I would be an outreach teacher. Yeah, which is an itinerant teacher. Yeah.
So
but the school is called outreach.
Do you have a centre for your outreach? Like we have our BRC in Pukekoi. Do you have a centre, or are you just by yourself? Like, do you have a workspace where there's a little office and a few of you?
Yeah, my little workspace is in my my house. So I'm very autonomous. That's one of the things I'll come to later that I really love about my my position. But we do have Kedi Primary School actually is my nearest base, where we have a little Harry Potter sort of cupboard for the RTDs that we under this, pretty much. It's close. Yeah. But we sort of attach ourselves to anywhere that will have us, really. Okay.
And is that particular to the far north, or all outreach teachers? Like I know that with the north being so spread out, and you wouldn't expect to have several centres up there, but is that countrywide? It's like that?
Yeah, countrywide it would be the same. Yeah, sort of attaching yourself to any adopted school that will have us. So we do actually have in Whangarei there is a dedicated office actually in Tikipunga High School, and it's right next door to the Blends office. Actually, they sort of share a space. They share a space, and they're next door. So that's a dedicated office. But anywhere further than Whangarei, we just hijack schools.
Because I noticed when I was in Tauranga visiting the Blends that Ko Taku Reo is in the same building as the Blends.
I think they're sensory units, aren't they? They sort of, it's quite nice that they come together as sensory units. Yeah. So that's the Whangarei setup.
Oh, cool. So do your centres or branches, given that you're so by yourself in a good way, do your centres or branches come together frequently?
By Zoom. Zoom is our friend. Okay. Yeah, so the distance actually, in Whangarei and in Auckland and the big centres, yes, they would have group meetings once a week all together. But up here where I'm in the far north, it's just too far to go on do a day teaching and then driving for an hour and a half to a meeting is not conducive really. So so Zoom is our friend. We get together once a week as a team and once together as a national school by Zoom.
So when you say your team, who's your team?
Okay, so I have so my team is mid and far north. So my team leader is in Kedi, and then we have 2 RTDs. So we have an RTD in Kedi who does right out to Broadwood area and right up to Kaiō, and then I would take over for the rest of the country. Luckily, we do have another RTD coming on board next week, so I'm very excited about that because my time has been so thinly spread in the last studying 3
for
days
sure.
days a week, and working 3 days a week. It was just crazy. So we've got a new RTD, yay! So I won't be by myself. Has been quite lonely, and you know, you do need people to have a soundboard, you know, to bounce ideas off of, which I haven't had. And that's quite difficult sometimes over Zoom. You just lose that personal contact, don't you? So just to have somebody else up here physically is going to be amazing.
So because you are quite new to the role, like I've read through your bio and stuff, and you've obviously got lots of skills and lots of experiences relevant to the job, but it seems like you've been doing it by yourself with no mentor role for a long while. That must have been quite hard, I imagine. Do you have somebody who comes and you know, models how to do assessments, or will work beside you, or anything like that? Has that happened, or can that happen? Is that built into
it does happen. So I have occasionally training where I go down to Kitty and I might observe somebody watch. I might watch somebody teach or do assessments and teach, but it's actually been quite thin on the ground for the last year. So hoping that will change.
Wow, bit of a baptism by fire then. Really. So how many students rather do you have on your caseload? Sorry, I'm jumping off my question list, but
no, that's all right.
How many have you got, and what's the age range?
Well, the age range can be from 5 right up to 21, in fact. Okay. It's not right now, but we can take on students from age 5 in just as they leave, or around early childhood education. And if they're always funded and still in school, we can take them right up to 21. But currently my caseload is, I have 10 direct students and about 18 indirect students. So the difference being, direct students on my caseload are the students with the most need, and they get weekly planned teaching and assistance from me. So I have 10 of those scattered around Kaitaia. And then I have about 18 indirect students. So an indirect student is a student who might not necessarily need me academically, or, you know, for their audition, for their, you know, their hearing skills, their language skills, but they have the equipment. So, you know, I check in with their teachers, their whānau,
maybe advisory and
just maybe once or twice a term, you know, just to see how's it going, you know, how they're doing at school. Just really, you know, always keeping them on the peripheral just in case they start to slip, and in which case I would pick them up as a direct student again. But really just looking after and maintaining their hearing equipment, which is really important for them, because they need that equipment to access the curriculum.
That's a lot to get through in 3 days. I was just doing some quick maths in my head there. If you're trying to get 10, right, okay. So again, jumping off, and then I'll go back to my questions. So we do from 0 to 21. Who does from 0 to 5 if you're only picking them up at 5? Yeah,
that's a good question. So there are advisors on deaf children, AODCs. So their role, generally, a child that's found with a hearing loss is picked up at the newborn screening program. And so as babies, they would be picked up as having a hearing loss. So an AODC, advisor of deaf children, would pick up those children, and they would stay with those children and whānau right the way through to year 3, which is age 7.
Oh, okay.
And it's a pretty tough role, because they have some pretty ethical decisions to work through with the family, because obviously there are 2 main choices to be made if you have a child with a hearing loss. The choice being, do you go with the social model of deafness and use sign language as your first language for that child, which then impacts on the family. To all the family would need to learn, you know, how to sign and learn about deaf culture and really, you know, make a big commitment to signing? Or are they going to use the medical model and go down the hearing aid route, cochlear implant, depending on the you know, the severity of the hearing loss, to try and fix it? So yeah, are you going to fix it, or are you going to, you know, embrace it as a culture? Yeah. So so to answer your question, then an AODC would really have those hard decisions and go through the ECE schooling with those children right up to year 3, and then generally a resource teacher of the deaf would pick them up at year 3. So the only exception that we would get a child younger than 7 would be if the AODC really did find that you know, those children do need a teacher of the deaf to pick them up academically and run with them. Yeah.
So you don't really have to work with whānau to make those decisions about what sort of communication mode they're going to go through. That's already a done deal by the time they get to you.
Most often than not, but of course there are other situations where children can acquire a hearing loss later than birth, or if obviously it's not, it could also be picked up at the before school hearing check. I've got to mention that. But you know, if a child were to, for example, pick up meningitis, which is, you know, very serious situation, they could lose their hearing through meningitis at a later age, at which point, you know, an RTD would have to come in and pick up that role. Also, I have a student who was discovered to have cancer when she was 8. This was before my time, but she discovered she had cancer. It was a childhood cancer in her brain. At 8, she went through surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and the chemotherapy and radiation actually killed all the hair cells in her cochlea, in her inner ear, and lost her hearing instantly, aged 8. So the RTD actually stepped in and took over that role of the decision making. Right. And the decision making, because that child had already experienced speech and hearing and language and everything up to age 8, that the decision was made to continue her hearing. So she actually did have a cochlear implant. She went down that route, but the RTD supported that whānau with that decision making all the way through. So
is there a bias? Like, this is a ridiculous question, we've all got biases, like we all have our own, but as an organization, does Ko Taku Reo encourage one or the other, or is it purely situation and whānau led?
Yeah, you know, you've got to be really unbiased and neutral when you're making these decisions, and all you can do is give both benefits, and there's benefits in both, and the whānau have to just really assess what's best for their family and what they think is going to be the best for that child. But the criteria actually from Ko Taku Reo's point of view, for a child to be on our service is that they either consistently wear hearing technology, or that they are full signers. Right. So they have to either wear hearing aids or be signers to you know, get a teacher of the deaf.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I'll try and jump back onto my questions now before we get booted off Zoom. Do all RTDs work across age and education levels from 5 to 21, or do you have a special area? I'm picking that because there's only one of you in the far north. You must do all of it. So there's not going to be a sort of a primary sort of secondary. Is that general? Like if you were in a bigger centre, are there people who specialise in secondary, or do you just do the full range?
So I do the full range because, as you rightly say, it's just me. In the bigger centres, you know, in the big cities like, you know, Wellington, Christchurch, Auckland, I would guess that, you know, every teacher comes into this role from different backgrounds, don't they? You know, people come in as ECE trained, people come in as senior trained, intermediate trained, and so I guess the natural thing would be to pick up, you know, the range that you're comfortable with and you've got expertise in. But you know, every teacher is trained to deal with every age group. So yeah, we just get what we get. Usually we're assigned schools. So if you were to get XYZ school, any student that came into that school, you know, you'd help any student in that school, which I guess has answered your question, because it would either be a primary school or an ECE school or a high school.
For sure.
So it's a mixed bag, Mel.
So for yours, for instance, I think you just said you didn't have any really young ones. What's your age range?
No, my youngest
of your directs.
So my youngest student is 6 actually, and they're in a kura. Yeah, so that's quite interesting for me because my te reo is not strong. So the school does encourage, we have a very strong strategic team for te reo Māori, and so we're encouraged to pick up and improve our te reo. But so yeah, that's in a kura. And then I have got year 13, just about 2 year 13 students at college, just about to transition into a big wide world. So, when I help them, their help is more about learning about disability rights, learning about, in the workplace, what you'd be entitled to, what benefits are out there for them. So they've sort of gone beyond that, teaching them language and, teaching them audition and those type of things. And it's all about supporting them on their next journey. So, the role is huge.
Self-advocacy like stuff. And yeah, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess, again, because of where you are, your learners would stay with you. They wouldn't swap RTDs unless they changed areas. If they moved down to, Auckland, they'd change. Is that true of the rest of the country too? Is it, or do they get shuffled around, or do you try and keep them with the same RTD for the relationship throughout?
Yes, absolutely. So effectively, I could have a student from year 1, age 5, right through to 21. If I stayed in the role,
it's
could
lovely,
have that.
Isn't it? That's one of the things that attracted me to the job.
It's following that child through. Those relationships with the whānau and that child would be thick as, it'd be lovely. But unless they moved out, so it's very transitionary up here. In the far north, and I suppose in the whole country, it's the transition rate is quite high, but especially up here. So children coming in, children leaving. And there's a lot of protocol and paperwork and things around that sort of situation. But yeah, you'd stay with the child; they'd be yours. Yeah.
Is there so I think you answered this before. You said they had to either be signing or for their main communication, or they had to wear hearing aids. Is that hearing tech, sorry. That's the criteria for them, like in vision there's a line in the sand, sort of like a vision number acuity that gets you taken on. Is that not so there's not a how much you can hear thing? It's
no, so the spectrum of hearing is the spectrum of hearing. So we could have students who've got very mild hearing right through to profoundly deaf, no hearing at all, and everything in between. It could be they could be unilateral, which is only deaf in one ear, bilateral, both ears. So the hearing loss is that's the criteria, but what the hearing loss is not the issue. So it's whether they're wearing equipment, they're signing, and they also to qualify for becoming on a direct caseload to be actually taught, they need to be 2 standard levels below where they should be for their age stage.
So they have to be not managing academically.
Yeah, so once a student, so that's another reason why you might lose a child on your caseload. They might not need you anymore. So when we first get a student, we do lots of assessments, lots of testing to see actually do they need, are they in need of a teacher, or are they coping quite well? They might be doing tickety-boo by themselves, dealing with their hearing loss, doing all the right things, wearing their equipment. But if they're 2 levels below,
curriculum levels. 2 whole curriculum levels.
Not necessarily curriculum levels. So if it's like if they were reading on the reading colour wheel, for example, are they below on the colour wheel? Are they in maths, are they 2 stages below where they are? Not curriculum level, sort of.
I was going to say that would be huge.
It would be huge. No, standard testing levels for that particular area. Yeah.
Okay, so what sort of assessments are commonly used? Like, and as RTVs, we use functional vision assessments. We're not so much interested in clinical vision as their functional vision, how they're using it for learning. Is there a functional hearing test, or is there something that you do,
Yeah.
It's equivalent, or
so the hearing tests would all be done through audiology, and that's where we would pick up many of our students that were referred from audiology. So they've already done, we already know where their hearing is. So the assessments that we do, we do assessments for articulation and speech. We would do assessments for audition, which is their listening skills.
Okay.
We would do assessments for how they process and understand language, and also pragmatics. How does the student use the language that they have? We'd also assess things like theory of mind and social skills. Many students miss the basic skills that are implicitly picked up by hearing students, such as how to deal with emotions, how to make friends, how to, look at a situation from somebody else's point of view. Things that hearing children take for granted. Hard of hearing children just miss those skills. They don't know. So it's a really wide field of assessments. It's so interesting. Yeah. And then sort of putting together a program to fill those gaps and catch them up, and just filling those disparities. Yeah.
So that sounds really similar to what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the blind, and it is so much of it is the social and the things that they haven't learned incidentally and don't even know other people do differently, because all that is inappropriate, or interesting.
Exactly.
I've just had the 10-minute call on our Zoom, so if I start talking fast, you'll know that's why.
Okay. All right.
So what sort of supports do you offer? How do you make the curriculum accessible for people with significant hearing loss? Obviously, you do some sort of assistive tech or hearing. What did you call that? Well, you didn't call it hearing aids. You called it hearing
technology. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So what can you offer, or what do you offer to help them access? I guess I'm talking about mainly students who are in a mainstream class.
All right, so you're sort of talking about what the role is really. What sort of things?
What sort of supports? Like, are you alongside them in class, or are you?
Okay.
You touched on building social skills and that sort of thing. That would be something you would run as a program. Anything you haven't had a chance to mention about it, really?
So the role of a teacher of the deaf, an outreach teacher of the deaf, is to go in and really hone in one-on-one with exactly what that student needs. So, I would plan, after assessments and looking at what they need, I would plan a program specifically to fill in what they need so they can access the curriculum. So I would either go into the classroom and work with a small group of children who are like-minded or like-leveled with them, perhaps to include their peers. I might do very occasionally whole class teaching to support the whole class and support the child. But more often than not, I would withdraw a child and do one-on-one dedicated teaching for what they need. And that is so rewarding. That's something that I kind of missed out, I think, on being a classroom teacher, that the fact that there are so many children in a classroom who, you can't reach them all, but as a teacher of the deaf, I can reach everything that one child needs. Yeah, and so that's all part of improving their, improving their communication, their language. We teach New Zealand Sign Language, because you never know, they might want that in the future, and that's a really good skill. That's a third language for them to have. So yeah, sort of, and obviously they're in their mainstream school, so I speak with their teacher and their SENCOs about how I can improve the classroom situation. Very noisy place, the classroom, and of course hearing aids pick up, they augment everything, not just what they need to hear. Hearing aids augment everything, so it's like how to deal with that situation. So a lot of teachers wear microphones around their neck, like on a lanyard, which so the teacher speaks directly one-on-one to those child's ears. And so making sure that the classroom has the equipment that child needs for their optimum benefit.
So you're sort of advisory and coaching to the teachers as well.
Yes.
How to maximise their efficiency.
Yeah, I also work with their teacher aides. Often our students will have teacher aides, and so I'm teaching their teacher aides to, how to clean the equipment. How to troubleshoot if something's not working. Does it need batteries? Does it need, all the sort of tests that we can sort out. I also teach my teacher aides how to do a hearing test that we use in the classroom called a Ling test. So that's basic sounds. So the frequencies of human speech is over a frequency range, and so we have a set of sounds that we test our children with every week or every time we see them, and if they can hear those sounds with their hearing aids on, we know that their hearing aids are working. So it's a very basic thing that I can ask a teacher aide to do every day, and to know that they can hear what the teacher's saying. So,
awesome. Okay, I'm jumping through to some other ones because I've now got 5 minutes left. Do you often work with complex needs students? Like, do you, for instance, in your role, go into a special school where they're
all right, so no, we just work in mainstream schools. So we do work with what we would call deaf plus students. So they might be deaf plus something, some other, they might have some other additional needs. But if to qualify for teaching of the deaf resource, the child, it's the hearing loss that the child has, that is the big pull, that's the main pull. So if a child has a hearing loss and a complex need, the complex need would trump the hearing. So the complex need, so that child would be mainly worked with by a resource teacher of complex needs, who might get advice from a deaf teacher. So it's purely about the hearing from our perspective. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, that's slightly different to my role, but I'm not going to discuss that now because it'll cut into my 4 minutes and 11 seconds. We've already done that. We've done the describing your caseload. Okay, this one. So many students I've got as an RTV have nothing wrong with the eyes, with the actual gear that you've got. It's the way that their brain reads visual images that's impaired, and that's cerebral vision impairments. Is there a comparable condition in your field where the hearing equipment is fine, but the student experiences hearing loss?
Yeah, for sure. So there are 3 types of hearing loss. One hearing loss is where is conductive hearing loss, where the blockage or the hearing loss is in the outer or the middle ear. Then there is a sensorineural hearing loss where it's the cochlea in the inner ear that's not working, or you can have a combination of both. So there is a third, fourth type of hearing impairment where the ears are fine. Nothing wrong with the ears. The ears can hear the sound, take the sound in, but when in the processing stage where the sound goes from the ears through the auditory nerve to the brain, the auditory nerve might have an impairment very similar to your sensory impairment. That's not covered by Ko Taku Reo's teaching criteria, and it's a bone of contention for many. But because it's not, the impairment is not coming from the ears. The impairment is from the nerves onwards. So yeah, so it's very prevalent. It's very prevalent, but it's not covered by our services.
Yeah, I mean, our CBI, we're becoming more and more aware that it's becoming the main visual impairment.
I would hazard a guess to in future, that may happen, but not yet.
That would blow up your caseload, wouldn't it? I don't think you could be by yourself up there. Do all RTDs need to know New Zealand Sign Language? Is that something you need before you come on? I can't imagine that you could do your role without it.
Yeah, you don't need to be a signer when you come on board, but you certainly need to pick that up very quickly once you get going. So we might not have many signers on our caseload. I have one full signer on my caseload, but we do have within Ko Taku Reo deaf colleagues, deaf managers. We're speaking with deaf people all the time. So it is a requirement to learn sign language once you're on board, and a PD to continue to improve it. Yeah, and I love it. Brilliant.
Okay. Are there any particular leading lights or thought leaders in deaf education in Aotearoa? Like if you were going to fangirl someone and wear a t-shirt or a badge or something, who would it be Is there
I
anyone?
don't really know. No,
Yeah,
not
I couldn't
really.
answer it either, but I thought it was a cool question.
No.
Having at you.
No, there's an amazing person who's got a TikTok account called, is it Chenaman or Chelaman? He advocates for LGBTQI, he's transgender, plus he's deaf, plus he's Asian, plus he what else? Like he advocates for 4 different minorities, and he's a big role model for deaf kids. So I guess he's cool.
Awesome. So he's popular, someone they would all know, and
The kids would definitely know him. It's either Chellaman or Chenaman, or sorry,
I'm going to check
I
that
didn't do
out.
my research. Yeah, he's very
Awesome.
cool.
That's cool. Do you have a formal or informal mentor for your role?
I just have my team leader, because there's nobody up here. I have my team leader who I can contact on Zoom, and it's important because